All right, welcome back, everybody. My name is Dave. This is the Radical Independent. Have a special guest on the show. We've had him on before. He actually ran for governor here in the state of Florida as a libertarian, which takes a little bit of intestinal fortitude to do that in this political environment that we're currently in. The media pretty much ignored him, but I did not. That's why I had him on the show. His name is Hector Roos. How are you, Hector? What's going on?
Hey Dave, thanks for having me again, and happy holidays. And yes,
Yeah.
intestinal fortitude is one of those, but that's what makes you the radical independent.
Yeah. I am a little different, and I get a lot of grief for, you live in Florida, you're down in the Miami area, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, and I'm over on the other coast. I'm near Fort Myers, but I can tell you, actually, a lot of people from Miami moved to my town. They just
Sure.
either the cost of living is a little better, the housing market, well, it used to be better, but now I don't know. Everything is kind of changing. But so we kind of share the same geography, and we kind of have some of the, politics. This is a pretty Trumpian state, very DeSantis, very Trump. Still a lot of signs out there. I drive around, and people, although they are starting to come down a little bit. I haven't seen quite as many Trump signs as I used to. And for people that like Donald Trump, I don't throw shade at Trump just to do it. Like, I don't do a gratuitous I hate Trump or never Trump style video. I just think that people are missing the bigger problem. They're going after this like two-party paradigm and this horse race and this constant, my team scored a point over here yesterday. Did you see that decision in court that Trump got? Or on the other side, did you see how Trump got destroyed in court yesterday? So I'm sitting here going, okay, we got what, 32 trillion in debt. The printing presses just keep on running. And Zelensky comes over here last week, and this is the thing that inspired me to give you a call and say, hey, man, you want to come on and talk about foreign policy? And he gets a hero's welcome. It was just strange. And I think a few Republicans skipped it, and a couple didn't stand up during the speech. And it's hilarious. I think one of them might have been Thomas Massey, who's probably one of my favorite members. If I had to choose, like, who do you like in Congress? Crap, I don't know anybody. But he's okay, I guess, in some ways. At the media, it's so funny, this propaganda media, it's like they didn't stand during the speech. What is it? Do they like Putin? Are they Putin puppets? And this just, it's crazy, man. So I wanted to get your take on our foreign policy in general. I know that's kind of like throwing out a big conversation starter, I guess. Sure. I mean, where are you when it comes to the empire? Like, what are we doing, and why is it pretty much the same thing in every administration? One president has his priorities, right? Which is, okay, we're out of Afghanistan, right? Which is a good thing. But, and we could argue about how much we're out of Afghanistan and what's going on there now. But let's just put that aside for a moment. And now we're in Ukraine. And this, to me, seems like it's even worse because we're up against a legitimate superpower in the Russian Federation. And a lot of these Cold Warriors from the past, they hold on to that, we're up against the evil empire. And it's not the same country. It's not the same belief system. And you're dealing with a different mindset than what we had during the Cold War. But yet many Americans they hit the clicker and they turn on the TV and they see what the propaganda is saying. All right. And then they just don't bother to research it or to maybe look for an alternative view. And by the way, that's why this channel is so important, Hector. This is an alternative view platform. Whether you agree with me or not, I am providing people a different point of view. So anyway, with that big, long intro, what do you say about our current foreign policy and where it's going, and maybe where it's been, and maybe address what's been going on from one administration to another, and how, this is pretty much the definition of insanity.
Well, let's do a recap of the status of the empire, as you so eloquently put it. There's only 100 and what, depending on which definition you go to, there's either 120 countries in the world or 140 something. Out of those countries, we have over 60 military. The United States has over, and let me posit the nation, the United States, not the American people, have over 60 bases in throughout the world in these different countries. And so actually it's more than that, but I'm saying we're deployed in at least 60 of those countries. So in other words, the United States of America is occupying literally half the world at this point with military force. There's deployments. There are hot zones where there's actually combat happening, not simply Ukraine, but Yemen has had an ongoing conflict there for the better part of a decade. Africa is always there's always some type of activity that's whether they talk about it as local terrorism or local ongoing civil wars in some of these countries. In South America, the same. The famous narco terrorist groups are often work hand in hand with government agencies. Oops, I'm not allowed to say that. Some alphabet agency, usually the same agencies that are designed to crack down on them. In fact, two or 3 weeks ago, there was an expose talking about actually it was in the New York Times, talking about high level indictments in the not the DEA, which is the Drug Enforcement Administration, and how that agency essentially gave rubber stamped the drug trade for 3 or 4 decades, and people at the highest levels of the organization made a lot of money, and it's all starting to kind of unravel as these indictments come in for activities that happened in the 80s and 90s. That really basically people started talking like how all these relationships and made the drug trade possible, and in other words, and the whole drug trade, of course, was used to destabilize governments in South America, and Central America and Mexico. So Latin America generally. Now, again, this was a recap, right? So just to point out how military affairs is very much involved in foreign policy in the United States. We don't have it used to be called it used to be run by Department of War. Then it was changed in the 40s to the Department of Defense, or 30s, sorry. And then obviously post 9/11, it was all kind of it still exists, but it was all kind of they created another department called Department of Homeland Security to essentially consolidate all these foreign intelligence services and, of course, the national defense, which is kind of duplicative of what we already have in the Department of Defense. But the point is that to give you the Cliff Notes version of all this, every conflict that exists in history, in actually human history, always has to deal with limited resources, fighting over private interests controlling of limited resources around the globe. Now it's limited for a particular reason. In some cases, there are a lot of and usually it has to do with mineral rights, energy resources, and simply geopolitical, location, geopolitical, like the Middle East or the Red Sea. We're talking about trade routes, right? Like how the movement of goods and services happens around the world, how Amazon gets to deliver 0-day supply chain because there's a Suez Canal. Everybody remembers, was 2-3 years ago when the Suez Canal had a big freighter just kind of get stuck in the middle of it, and it froze global trade. And so the world is interconnected. And generally speaking, what we see though is that yes, it's interconnected, but that has made things easier for humanity. But at the same time, what we see is while there's great opportunities for movement of goods, services, and ideas, at this time, because these resources, these foreign policy ideas, the reasons for them are consolidated around a set of private interests that have essentially captured the attention of Congress, of foreign powers, and everyone's kind of playing the same game of, I'm going to use government, I'm going to use the military to prop up or to guarantee my, same thing we complain here at home or in socialist countries, to guarantee profits for Wall Street, for shareholders, or just or simply for our accounting books, right? The guaranteed profit is what these kind of people are chasing all over the place, and they'll get it hook or crook. Why? Because they're using our money, they're using other people's money and resources to make this happen. And of course, ultimately, if anyone who's old enough to remember the 80s, they'll use the American reputation abroad as well to cash in the reputation of Americans personally. So when Americans were known for the most productive and innovative people in the world, most peace loving and the most culturally evolved people, right? Where the greatest brands in the world were American brands. And for the most part, they still are. But it means a little something different nowadays. Instead of freedom, it means something the opposite around the world, unfortunately, or at least it's devolved into some type of when you refer to Americans, you're referring to barbarians, frankly. And that's what it looks like on the outside. And COVID, like I said, when the COVID scare happened, and really ongoing, and not just COVID, but ongoing global health crisis, you notice how interconnected all these interests are. The private interests are, in the sense that you see all these countries operating in lockstep, with global agencies, and even foreign policy was shaped around these needs that were adopted by these home countries or their governments, at least. So you can see that it's the foreign policy, and we're talking about foreign policy, not necessarily military policy. It's just they're closely intertwined. So and now there's obviously the United States really hasn't had a military opponent in the world that could compare to its capabilities. So you get by virtue of no competition, let's invent one, right? So we've historically, for the last 40 years, we've seen attempts to invent or revive the Soviet state and try to reinvigorate a Cold War. We've seen it similarly with communist China, with saber rattling over Taiwan, and generally these are attempts. These are actions to continue to sell the idea that the world is divided and more different than they are the same, and how we need essentially a big government, or at least a big foreign policy intervention model to keep the world safe for humanity, right? It's no different than really what occurred 150 years ago with the theory of you have the adult states and the children states, right? So in other words, the Western world was always had the conceit of saying that we were the mature parents in the room, and everybody else was learning how to be a modern country, and it's simply an evolution from those times that actually led us into World War One. In fact, most recently, we're celebrating 77 years of fairly regular war since the onset of World War One. So nothing really has changed in terms of the dynamics of the same people groups are fighting that were fighting 100 years ago. In terms of, like, if you hear, the Saudis are attacking the Saudis as a tribe, we're attacking the Yemenis as a tribe. Same thing's happening now. In Russia, the Russians are attacking a Ukrainian state. That would have occurred 100 years ago too, and so forth. So we're not really seeing anything new about or ingenious about these tactics, or even in the newspaper headlines. If you go back 100 years, you'll really read the same headlines. So it's and ultimately I'm going to close this off in talking about the financial markets. So the financial markets, if you look at the top 100 Dow Industrial Average, you're looking at what government contractors, Raytheon. You're looking at IBM, which is a big government contractor. Amazon is a big government contractor. So you're seeing a lot of large companies that are what they call blue chips, that are actually rely on this entire network of foreign policy and goals of global hegemony, really to maintain their prosperity. So and what I was going to end this on the side. Okay, so you know what stock is or company has been more profitable in the last 5 years compared to more profitable than Amazon, more profitable than Apple, more profitable than Tesla, in last 5 years. Have you ever heard of that? You know that company?
Could it be BlackRock?
No, and it's not an investment firm.
It's not an investment firm. So it's bigger. It's okay. So bigger than Amazon in the last few years?
Yeah. More profitable.
Raytheon?
It's not a contractor either.
All right.
So,
You got me. You got me.
It's a company called Aramco.
Okay.
So,
wow.
Which really is the state Saudi oil company, which controls. Yeah, they're the most profitable company in the world right now. And I want people to realize that if you had invested in that, and they're still profitable now, if you have invested in without all the ups and downs of Tesla, I mean, with all the ups and downs or development time for Apple, or they're also probably the most profitable company in the world in history. And they've only been around for what, 80 years, So wow. It's not like IBM's older than that. I mean, way older. So to put things in perspective, so the point is, we see financial markets that strictly depend on this. In American, I mean, if anyone's from Latin America, they know the term banana republic very well because it's an extension of the same policies. That basically they called the Central American countries banana republics because they had the United Fruit Company, which is was a conglomerate of, and still exists, Chiquita Banana and all those. They still exist for the most part, having control of a lot of the agriculture in Central America directed toward taking fruit cultivation and for exports to the United States. And they very much dominated politics in those countries too, to maintain not just security, but the maintain low pricing for their land in terms of taxation and whatnot. So this is nothing new. I hope I've given a good overview of really that foreign policy and private business affairs have always had to tie into it. It's not anything recent. And when we call whatever we say is foreign intervention, like military intervention, or even regulation, or let's just say like the example of the DEA or foreign our agencies trying to exercise control over markets, even over illicit drugs, that it's all part of actually a larger this larger notion of private sector controlling, the trying to exert control over the public markets through government agency.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that was a good summary. And as you were talking, I was thinking, and you and I, or maybe it was me and someone else, we were talking about libertarian stuff. And I said, there are a lot of libertarians out there that would just say, well, it's a private company. They can do what they want. But my argument is, well, they're a government actor at this point. It's not as if you can't make those connections. I mean, when you were talking, and that's why I said BlackRock, they just met with Zelensky, right? And they've already, made plans to rebuild the country, to do nation building through all of the different things under the BlackRock umbrella, which, again, if you do a little bit of research, it's incredibly scary and really kind of the tip of the spear when it comes to all of these conspiracy theories, because they tend to go back to BlackRock, and people go, oh yeah, they're this group over here, they've got ties to BlackRock. And to me, that's really scary. And as a libertarian minded person, I'm thinking to myself, well, Hector, how do you get out of this? You hear a lot of nice slogans like, hey, we need to pull the plug, or decentralize. That's a good one. I guess the decentralization has to be very, specific to your state, your county, your town, maybe. I don't know how you just, unplug from what appears to be this web. And you said 77 years, if you go back to World War I, and a foreign policy that's basically been searching for monsters, all over. The founding fathers of this country said, don't look for foreign entanglements. And I don't know if we ever took their advice wholeheartedly, but I think we did a better job toward the beginning of the country's history. But the last 100 years has been really a disaster. And it's one of the reasons I think that we're constantly looking at deficit spending. We've got 4,100-page omnibus spending bills that kind of don't mean anything. They're just, it's like you printed out all these pages and you threw it at a senator and they're going to go home. They're about to vote and then go home for Christmas. And of course, they're just going to rubber stamp. 90% of them. I mean, even if it's bizarre, even if you question, like, I think it was Rand Paul, that he didn't even say, hey, we need to stop. We need to stop spending. We need to stop sending the money to Ukraine. What he wanted was accountability. He wanted, hey, okay, you just sent 45 billion over there. Where's the money going? Shouldn't we have some oversight? Shouldn't we have somebody on the ground there to make sure that these weapons aren't winding up in the hands of, like the Ukrainians are great actors, but, they're just selling this stuff on the black market. And you see, American made whatever HIMARS system, in another country, and you'll know it's because if you're a parent, right, you don't just give your kids your wallet and say, hey, just whatever, dude, there's a bunch of credit cards in there, have at it. And it's just really bizarre that we're so focused on the horse race, who's running in 2024, the DeSantis Trump battle, all these different things that you're going to hear about in the news. And yet nothing of substance. I think there needs to be like a satellite somewhere that we can all commission as more libertarian minded people to beam the signal back down, to everybody. And they have, it's almost like it would be a takeover, take over a portion of the media, hostile takeover, and say, okay, we're going to give you an hour's worth of truth every night to counteract just 24 hours of propaganda. So, but my point is, Hector, how do you get out of this loop? It's like an endless loop. It's some kind of, matrix that people are just signing up for. I mean, I don't want to talk about COVID, but I mean, that's a great example of how people, okay, sure, well, just give my freedom away, and not even going to question what's in it, brother. I'm just going to do it because, there's one thing, I remember watching a video where the guy's like, I'm just going to roll up. I think it was in New York State, where some woman is, I'm not going to question what's in it. I'm just going to do it. And it's like, wow. It's like that kind of, if you want to call it gaslighting or propaganda or whatever, that's how do you turn that around? That's, I guess, what my question is. And relating to foreign policy, people just think, we're the world's superpower. They're still going on this stuff. Like we're the guys that we fix the things that other countries break, or we go in and break things, then we go and fix the stuff that we broke, and that helps everybody earn a living over at BlackRock and all your other companies, sure, some of which we've mentioned here. But so what's the solution, Hector? We have to be solution oriented. We can't just complain. I love to complain. It's fun. I get it out of my system. But at some point, what do we do?
Well, part of this is information, right? So we can't get the information out because things like first of all, we've gotten too used to social media, to the internet, to communicate to one another, rather than, when we, meeting as communities and public meetings, or even meeting for coffee, things that successful people do, the habits of successful people, basically generally people have abandoned.
Yeah.
And I mean that in a holistic manner. So we learn from the Twitter files of how manipulated the social media and the internet is. For those who don't know, the Twitter files is an ongoing information dump from Elon Musk about the goings on of the FBI, CIA, and other government agencies or that other agency, or what do they call it? OGA, other government agency, for instead of saying the CIA,
Yeah.
to manipulate conversations online that are happening on social media, particularly on Twitter, but of course they had to extend to other social media platforms as well. They all had a permanent team in place to govern and watch over and police the internet, essentially, of speech, of hate speech, or disagreeable speech, not even anything we classify as hate speech. You couldn't under their watch and under the previous governorship of Twitter, it was discovered that you couldn't complain about the Ukraine war. You couldn't complain about you couldn't make opinions on medical decisions publicly. You certainly couldn't comment on politics,
Election results.
especially
Yeah.
right,
Don't forget
or
about
the
election
2020
results.
election.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we have to come back to first principles on that. Just how do we get information out before? In other words, meeting people face to face is at this point more productive than trying to do so online exclusively. Like we have to. It's easy, but just because it's easy doesn't mean it's effective, right? So that's the first thing. The other thing is when you do have this information, you basically do need to establish a record of how does it when you call people out or call either politicians or other leaders out. Really, what you should be trying to do is point out the hypocrisy. They say they're wrapping themselves in the American flag, saying they support freedom and democracy, and look at their behavior when they're actually making decisions, right? Or what they say behind closed doors that are revealed. In other words, you cannot wake up a population, you cannot educate a people, you can't even show them that there's an actual problem unless you provide information to them effectively that creates a cognitive dissonance to that person that can otherwise creates the opportunity for them to want to know more and ultimately invite them to change their paradigm. That's the short end of it. We're going to be the same tools of giving information as well as disinformation are also available to us. So their disinformation is really trying to, and what I mean that, like we already learned, government programs, even foreign governments, by the way, as we learned in the last election, big election cycles, try to influence public opinion, and we can do the same by you say gaslighting. You say gaslighting is a bad thing. Some places it can be a good thing. So when you want to gaslight, the point of, hey, I'm going to repeat this. What have been the biggest scandals in the decade, right? If how does it say, the child sex ring involving the person who did not kill himself, Epstein, right?
Yeah.
Is not on your top of your list. If exism or whatever that church was called that practiced the same thing, that had members of the Hollywood elite involved, was not on the top of that list. If the wake, where the origins of the virus, right? If that's not on top of your list, I don't know what is. And of course, the idea that even the most recent this idea of FTX, which is also, by the way, another plug to how foreign policy is shaped by economics or financial markets. FTX is the big cryptocurrency platform out. That if that's not on the top of the list either, I'm not sure what else could be.
Right.
Of course, the rise of Tesla, and by the way, in the last decade, just talking about the last decade, the rise of Tesla, and all the different ideas that been spun off from Elon Musk. Certainly Amazon who's capturing the market share, and the things about the 2016 election that we're still talking about now, right? So if all of these things, the disinformation campaign from the opposition, the people who want to basically control what you're talking about, don't want you to keep repeating these stories from the past. Like, how did this happen? Why have we outsourced all these things? Why, to Elon Musk? Or I'm not saying that Elon Musk is a bad guy, but it's something to question. The rise of the wealthiest man in the world, and we can't talk about that. That should be talked about. right?
Yeah.
How his wealth exploded in a course of a decade. And of course, but again, depopulation schemes and the Bill Gates Foundation, and of course, and what happened in the 2016 election with Facebook and contributions toward funding the election itself,
Hmm.
the operation. So those are things to actually wonder, and they're actually not being as openly discussed as they could be. And frankly, at the end of all this, it's all foreign policy deals again as the this conversation in regards about scarce resources, right?
Yeah.
Who manages scarce resources? And energy actually is not that scarce. Like we're dealing, when you talk about like diamonds, and you talk about gold, and you talk about even energy. These are not actually precious resources to the extent that there's a natural scarcity for them. For example, there is most diamonds in the world are controlled by De Beers. They operate a monopoly of the supply. They control the supply. So obviously, they try to keep the price of diamonds artificially high. Now, notice I say artificially. Now, same with add food stocks, for instance, or energy, or I say gold. Let's say gold in the United States. The gold reserves in the United States are actually still underground, owned by
Hmm.
the federal government and the federal controlled lands in the West and Alaska. Where they control what 60-70% of the land in the West. I mean, and they're not going to allow those gold deposits to be mined. So again, keeping the price of gold artificially high, and that's high for the standards we have now, right? Um, so an energy, right? And at the end of the day, there's a lot of different ways to generate electricity. We have, but somehow we are, and I'll name a couple, right? Anything that translates from to mechanical operation can turn a wheel, something can generate electricity. So whether that's waves, whether that's steam, any kind of steam. Most actually, we're operating basically on the same steam turbine engine that's been in place for 150 years. Right? It
Yeah.
was invented in the 1840s.
Right.
That was invented in 1840, and everything else has just been an improvement on the capability of those engines. So I'm so when there's just different applications of what's heating the water to make it change the steam and then push a turbine, uh, or a flat basically a wheel.
Right.
With that said, so those applications. But you can use solar energy in the United States, for instance. We're way behind Europe on those matters. We haven't built a new nuclear power plant in the United States since the 70s,
Hmm.
and we have clean nuclear nowadays. So it's not to say that our lives and really our civilization are not at the control, the behest of these private interests is to minimize really what are these functionally the price, the cost of the different levers of cost of our living that affect our cost of living. So housing is always manipulated by local regulation, right? If you really wanted to, the difficulties of building your own house these days. I don't know about you, but we're only two generations removed in some places in the United States from people who actually built the house with their own two hands, right?
Yeah.
And they're still
Yeah.
standing, and they're
Yeah.
still standing better in a hurricane than the new ones that were
Right.
built by industrial standards. So I just I want to point out that these are realities. These are so when we say what's the solution? Well, why do we have to deal with any of that type of control in our lives?
Hmm.
And that's really the conversation that's really about an individual, because your expression of freedom, if you don't want to live under a house that in a traditional home that has a folio number that is attached, and I'm a realtor,
Yep.
that is will permanently for the rest of your life, or even after you die, will still be taxed for its simple value, and you will never really own it, because if you stop paying for it, the politicians will order it to be seized and sold
Yeah.
at auction. So if you don't want that, there's a lot of different ways to live your life. and to control the cost of your, whether it's food or, this whole movement back to growing your own food, and obviously not being educated by government schools and government standards. I mean, at the end of the day, it depends on what you want to accomplish in life and how you want to live. So the decentralization isn't just simply this idea that's been bantered around, isn't simply an idea is at its heart an idea that we can make decisions better for ourselves than a large bureaucratic state, right?
Right.
Far removed from us. So if we're going to allow a local government to do that, at least we're putting our resources together, and we can appeal to more local government that's affected by the same decisions they're making, as opposed to a bureaucrat that lives 5,000 miles away, maybe in California, maybe in DC, has their decisions have no impact on their own lives, right? So that's really where we come down to when it comes to decentralization. So in other words, Florida, we'll use the Florida example since we're here. Last year, Florida lawmakers met at a special session, and they created they passed a law to create their own OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety Standards Agency, that exists at the federal level, but now they're going to take over that function, because all these functions the federal government basically taken over, took over without really any permission from the states. So the states can just take it back whenever they want.
Yeah.
And they created that. It says, oh, we'll create our own standard, and you can't say anything about it. When I was running for governor, I said, hey, states also have the ability under the U.S. Constitution and their own constitutions, they're sovereign states, so they can actually have their own immigration policy too. I went that far. And you can, because if you're, to quote the late Justice Scalia, he said the mark of a sovereign state is control of who can be in their state, right? So he said, and naturally the extension is states with the control of their immigration policy can deny entry to the immigrants themselves to remain, right? We basically, United States is if we go back to first principles, United States is a real 50-state free trade zone, right? Where you're not allowed to prohibit the travel or transportation of people, goods, and services, but you can still say you're not allowed to say it,
Yeah.
But to that extent, that's what the magic of the United States of America has always been, the largest free trade zone in the world. And of course, from sea to shining sea, you had access to markets around the world too, who would want to be where you could bring in goods or export goods. That's what made the United States powerful, that it would generate wealth because it was able to find opportunities to export and import things of value to people. And we don't do that as much. Now, our biggest export is what?
I don't know, war.
Yeah, empire.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. I was right.
120 billion dollars to Ukraine so far.
Yeah.
That's basically how much we trade. That's our trade, about how much we trade with Brazil. One of the BRICS countries.
Yeah, and in Brazil, they've got a pretty strong economy, or they had it. We'll see what happens with their new election that just took place. And it's just a little sad to me listening to you talk about just how far removed we are, just having a conversation. You had some good ideas about, how to connect with people and how to talk directly to people. There's some of us that are really kind of black-pilled, though, at this point. We think to ourselves, well, we kind of have to sort of circle the wagons, take care of the people that are most important to us. Maybe, if you belong to a church, or you freely associate with people who are like-minded, and you can kind of maybe create your own little ecosystems, with you talked about food. And I mean, I'm really worried down the road, you're going to get to a supermarket and the shelves are all just going to be, we've already seen what's happened during these supply chain problems, where this centralized control is, and we've seen over the holiday weekend, in fact, in a different area, but not really surprising to me, what happened with Southwest Airlines, and how it's just and they're wanting the real answer, Hector, as to what's going on with Southwest Airlines. And I'm not gonna say one of my theories here, but this has been going on now for a couple of years, so you can kind of know where I'm thinking there. But there's more to it than just that. We're basically creating an environment too where people just feel as though they're not going to benefit from getting out into the workforce. And I heard one smart person say, look, you aren't ridiculous by staying home. You're using, kind of like common sense, like, okay, I have to go there and I have to jump through all these hoops, and they're going to hire me and they're going to pay me a wage that really sucks compared to the cost of living. I can stay home and not do all that. So the country has changed a lot. I've been around a bit longer than you. And, in the 80s, even though there was a ton of corruption in the 1980s, there was this spirit, in the air where people were like, man, I want to get a good job. I want to get out there. And, even if it were, it's like the Ayn Rand sort of, I'm going to do this for me, and I'm not, and that's where you get all the greed is good and all that stuff. But man, oh man, it's flipped on its head now. And I know we were kind of supposed to talk about foreign policy. I guess everything is kind of related. But when you have this kind of very narrow understanding of how the world works and how, work is something that used to be, just part of everybody's DNA. Now it's kind of like, if I can avoid doing this, because I've seen people avoid doing it and they're okay. They're eating Doritos and they're hanging out watching Netflix for 12 hours a day. And for some reason, it all seems to get paid for by somebody else, and before it was like, no, you're going to starve to death if you don't go out and work. I think it says that in the Bible, actually, where, if you don't work, you're not going to eat. So I think we've kind of gotten away from that. And our government, has been just printing money relentlessly. And that this is, you try to explain to somebody, well, this is why, your steak went from $2 a pound to $6 a pound. This is, because money is no longer, it just basic. And you talked about like maybe the homeschooling, or those things are all great solutions. My original sort of launching point for this little rant is the fact that it seems that time is of the essence. It's kind of like, if we don't turn some of this around, maybe we need to feel some pain. I say this to my wife a lot, and people still aren't feeling enough pain in order to even just look at someone else's opinions, or maybe change their own ways, or think, hey, the gravy train is over, but with the government, it seems like the gravy train rolls on no matter who the president is. And that's why I'm like, does it matter who I vote for president? Does it really make any difference? Anyway, what's your thoughts on that?
All right. So what I said, people should join together and along these common lines. You tend to agree with it. Is actually, it follows, most religions actually preach this, right? That in fact, there's a practice. Now, I say that, and then I want to point out the obvious. What happens next after that, right? So what happens after that is we already have all the solutions in front of us. One, we can create our own monetary system. We have Bitcoin. We have resiliency in that. Even though there's always going to be fraud in the system, like what happened with FTX, but compare that to the U.S. dollar, right? Right. The idea that you can have, by the way, the idea that you can start a family or own anything, or even build wealth with a currency that's constantly debased, is maddening. That's insane. So you have to be able to have a storage of wealth for your gains, for the things that you make. And that is whether that is a precious metal that hopefully is not as regulated by the government as or politicians. But Bitcoin seems to be one of those, seems to be that fit that natural solution. The second one is kind of more interesting. So in other countries, when there is political illeadership, or how do I say this, lack of leadership, or political instability, people take to the streets. They're national strikes that occur. Yeah. Everyone goes to streets, they demonstrate, and they demand change. And if they don't see it, they demand an election right then and there. The United States generally doesn't can't call for national elections in that manner, but we can do so at local levels. By the kind of interesting that by the way. So Brazil, you made a comment about the massive protests that have been going on that shut down the country because they felt like the election was not properly run. So, and of course, that a very similar allegation that occurred in 2016.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, you need community in order to even do that. You can't do it otherwise, and you can't do that from home, on a computer. So again, it all comes back down to you, yourself, your community, and on the streets. I'm going to ask you another question. And do you know where was the pain for lawmakers to adopt the Civil Rights Act of 1964? Where was the pain?
Yeah, it was a lot of pain. Yeah.
Where? Who was actually feeling pain?
Well, in the sense that they were the ones, the politicians were the ones that, didn't, this was, it was one of those things that was debated and kicked around for a number of years, but it took forever basically. And it didn't really change anything once that law, technically it looked good. Like a lot of laws, this is my opinion on it. Yeah, I'm sure you're going to chime in, but, this is a heart thing to me. This is like a brain thing, a spiritual thing. This isn't like, here comes the government again to equalize the playing field and to just make everything go away, that, to make racism go away. And this has still been, for how many years, since I've been alive, it seems to have gotten worse and not better. So I'm wondering, I'm going back to the founding fathers when they said, this government, we've given you this, but you've got to be a virtuous, decent person in order for this to run. It's like a car. You don't put, oil in the car. It's just not going to run. You put as much put fuel in it, and it's, so that's my,
right. There's maintenance that's involved there. Whether you listen to Benjamin Franklin saying it's a republic if you can keep it.
You can keep it. Yeah, that's it.
Or you listen to that not Thomas, is it either it was Thomas Jefferson or
I think it was Jefferson, but I might be wrong.
That's I was thinking about the other Virginian, the one who said Patrick Henry, who that what is the tree of liberty is watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants.
Yeah.
Right. So people forget patriots too. So and that doesn't mean armed conflict, but it does mean work, right? Sweat and tears and all that. So with that said, I want to point out how change even happens. 1964, I just want to say, because it's the biggest example that most of us are brought up with in the United States. You had essentially people mobilize citywide strikes.
Okay, you're talking about how it came to be. Yeah.
All right. How it came about. Yeah. They would do sit-ins, right? They would violate people's private property. Because they believe that getting the attention and creating a nuisance would draw attention to their issues and concerns, even to the point of that they would be arrested for it. Yeah. And they did so to challenge the morality of the day. If you believe this, then why do you support these laws? Now, you can, by the way, there have been 5 or 6 versions of the Civil Rights Act started in the 50s. 1950, I believe, 52 was the first one. So, and the last one was actually in the 70s. And that was in, 1968 and 70, and I believe there was one in 72. And guess what? Then the Libertarian Party was founded because, guess what? They found, these laws really don't work either.
Right.
So
there you go.
Again, it's a republic if you can keep it. So you can't rely on government to monitor itself, or politicians to monitor themselves, or to make sure that laws are properly enforced. You just can't do it. The culture has to be there in order for that to be something that's prescient and always occurring, which is why it's important for people to take action. But the reality is, like, going back to the American Revolution, the War of Independence was only fought by 3% of the population. That people were actively supporting independence. from Great Britain of the colonies and the creation of the United States. Only 3% of the population. The vast majority of people just either didn't care, basically didn't care. They didn't care which way it went. Now, this is true now and even today. Politicians do not want to be bothered whatsoever, right? It's an interesting formula. Politicians want to do as little as possible and be as and receive as much praise as possible for the little they did. On the other side, they obviously hate any type of ridicule, and they avoid controversy like the plague. So they want to be lauded all the time. So the reality is that what's more effective to them is actually just to make noise, to draw out. It's natural to complain, and that's why if they somehow everyone was convinced that a lot of people were convinced to go to social media and air out their grievances there instead of to the politician and mobilize people on the street. And guess what? The politician run the agencies protecting politicians decided to essentially limit the reach of the social media anyway. And at the end of the day, what has happened is now people are so livid that the politicians have become out of control and out of touch that they'll vote for anything, frankly, at this point. Even a libertarian, look at that. But we want them to. We libertarians want people to vote for good reason, not simply any particular vote. And by the way, I know a lot of people voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020 because they still wanted someone who would carry their grievances for them, that represent their grievances. They were voting against something, in other words. Same with DeSantis. DeSantis won a landslide victory in 2020 into 2022, his recent reelection, because people saw him as the greatest. They could express their concern and their protest against DC in that same manner. I mean, at the end of the day, people have been voting against things, and we want people to experience voting for things and for themselves. It is that simple, right? So if you get in a position where people are voting against something, it's easy. By the way, the easiest argument you can ever make is against something, because it's harder to prove a positive than it is a negative. Because all you have to do is come up with one absolute, true statement to negate a positive statement. A positive statement, you need proof and evidence, and you need to sell people, and that is the work that libertarians have been doing for 50 years. And that's why that shows in the politics, by the way. So we do have to change the party is changing its tactics now, trying to direct people toward more of a cultural, trying to harness this social angst and concern that is out there and trying to move it into, hey, this is the action we want to move people towards. And frankly, we're seeing this. It's either us or it's going to be the next establishment hack that basically says, "Oh, I'm different than the other establishment hack. You can trust me." Right. So and they're so disingenuous about it. They're generally very disingenuous. That's why Republicans lost nationally. They failed to take over the Congress. Why? Because they put too many people who were just hacks.
Right.
Never expressed an honest opinion in their life. They certainly had lived a life that had not shown, and that personally, right? They didn't really express concern for people's common humanity. And that shows whether that Republicans lost where Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, in U.S. Senate and high-profile U.S. Senate races against Fetterman in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, who had a stroke in the middle of the campaign, right? Yes. And who was the other one I said? Georgia, right?
Herschel Walker,
Come on. I mean,
I could have. Look, I don't think I'm all that smart, right? But I'm pretty sure I could have done a better job running for Senate than Herschel Walker. I mean, they could ask me questions, and I think I could answer a few of them. But and this is the disappointment. See, a lot of people who follow me are kind of like these. Like you talked about the grievance, a part of the Trump movement, right? And, China's bad and this is bad and that's bad. And people grab on to some of those things and and none of it, I'm not saying 0%, but a very low percentage of it is really going to affect you on a daily basis. And this is one of the things that I had to realize over my Democrat and Republican days, mostly Republican days, and briefly as a Democrat, believe it or not. But most of it is just, this is a game. Like I keep saying to people, this is kind of a distraction. And you mentioned that libertarians have been building this movement for 50 years. Let me ask you a question. While you were talking about Trump and I was thinking about the libertarian movement, do the libertarians need a Trump type character? Not like policy wise, but do they need somebody who's bombastic and entertaining and says crazy stuff that is in the news day after day? I mean, would they even cover it? Because the L is there instead of the D or the R. Would they okay, yeah, this he's interesting, but if he gets traction, crap, what are we going to do? I mean, but is that maybe something that, I mean, a high profile person with name ID but you mentioned too, identifying with someone's humanity. Obviously, Dr. Oz didn't do the trick if he couldn't beat Fetterman in Pennsylvania. You know what I'm saying? So what's your opinion on that?
I mean, there are a lot of things to rally. People should stop paying attention as much to the White House as they should City Hall, right?
Yeah.
The lockdowns, the decisions of public policy about medical health emergencies or public health emergencies were all decided at city halls, not the White House.
Right.
So, I'll tell you the example in Miami. I mean, and to my fault, I've been a little bit busier around the state to focus in my own hometown. But my hometown alone has FTX, has fraud related to cryptocurrencies, had an aide to the mayor lure a 16-year-old for gay sex in the city hall, right? And that guy's still that's still under indictment in the FBI.
Wow.
So we have you have record high taxes, property taxes. Obviously there's concerns about how money is spent to prevent flooding in areas in downtown. You have displacement of basically regular people because cost of living is so high, has turned up so high. There are issues locally. I mean, and if you turn to look at what is actually occurring in your own hometown, in your own city hall, you're going to find a lot of monsters to try to want to beat. You don't have to wait for the Trump, and you don't have to act like an ass like Trump, but you can join people where they are, where they're really hurting.
Yeah.
You can, join a food bank. You can help a community, raise a community garden. You can share resources, and ultimately, our economies and our political system, and no matter where you are, but they're all just generally fragile. I mean, they're only it's the communities that have to be resilient, that have to know, where supermarkets aren't going to be filled with food. I mean, you're in charge of having food, keeping food for an emergency from 2 weeks to a month, given any time. Supermarkets do not have that much food in them. Right. So it's really, again, you have to find where you are best to see the solution for your, in terms of transparency, in terms of, calling out the hypocrisy. Information is ultimately, there's an axiom: information is power, right? Yeah. And we can talk about foreign policy all you want. The reality is, each and every one of us that is listening to this in America are here because of foreign policy at one point or another.
Yeah.
Foreign policy is a consequence of a failing system domestically. So, and it's always been true. There was there's also this idea of wag the dog. So in other words, people, it's always been common throughout history that countries will go to war in order to deflect from problems at home. So if you wonder why there's so much war, it's because there's so much it's the easiest way to distract the public from problems at home and from solutions at home as well. So that's, don't make these kind of people win by you being distracted and focusing your attention elsewhere. I mean, there are problems. I mean, Fort Myers, you're near Fort Myers.
Yeah.
Why is it,
Mhm.
the Hurricane Ian that went through there 2 months ago, a late storm, hurricane storm, it will be the deadliest hurricane in 100 years, if
Yeah.
not the deadliest hurricane that easily in 100 years.
Yeah.
Uh, there are estimates of somewhere between 300 and 400 people
Mhm.
die,
Right.
and the main reason was because the local government, and all the way up to, by the way, the governor's office failed to announce an evacuation of low-lying areas in that county,
Yeah.
where you were. And by the way, that county, you're the probably a very young person in that county, because Florida already is the oldest state, and the county itself is the oldest county by population average
Yeah.
than all the other counties in Florida. And so you had a Category 5 hurricane with gusts exceeding 200 miles an hour barrel through the communities with the oldest people in the country, and you're
Mhm.
not thinking it's going to kill a lot of people. That's, obviously their estimate stopped at 140, I think it was last official number,
Yeah.
but people disappeared. I mean, they were just
Yeah, they did.
washouts.
Yeah.
So what we have there is a breakdown of communication caused by ineptitude, just people not caring, and
Mhm.
frankly, and without information being put out, how do you hold anyone accountable? So
Right.
part of, and this is what I discovered when I ran for governor, of how poor the communication is generally around the state, but even in many local communities, about emergency response, about public corruption, about just the goings on. People just don't care. They want to disconnect because they're so bombarded with national news that
Right.
they're even frustrated trying to keep track of what's going on in City Hall.
Mhm.
And that's a problem, because ultimately, if what we've had systemically in the country has been, and particularly we saw this acutely during the initial COVID, first 2 years of COVID, was you had the federal government pushing so much money all the way down to local governments,
Yeah.
that it was essentially usurping as much control away from the people by directing monies how they should be spent. All right, and so and what did we get out of that? We got expanded, police departments and more militarization of police departments. We had people being decided who was essential and who wasn't. We
Yeah.
had generational businesses closed because they were put out of business. They were told they were
Right.
non-essential,
Yeah.
or they were told, oh, you have to exist under reduced capacity. I mean,
Yeah.
to tell you the truth, these are things that people still live with.
Yeah.
And how can we say we want a future prosperity if someone can simply flip a switch
Mhm.
and just turn it off? How do
Yeah.
you turn off the future? So, and there's just unless we fight for that local control to say no, the right to say no to a higher level of government,
Mhm.
then this is really a non-starter of a conversation. And
Yeah.
ultimately, that means that your only recourse is to vote with your feet, leave, and either find a community that does have this type of practice, or to live somewhere so off the grid that they can't, or to stay ahead of the next thing, right?
Yeah.
So, and I really mean the next thing, right? So that means there are people who actually who do live in a ranch somewhere in the middle of the woods, right? But
Yeah.
but of course, that's a la, what was that shooting in the famous shooting in the 90s, Ruby Ridge.
Ruby Ridge. Yeah.
Yeah, that invites a Ruby Ridge situation,
Yeah.
because now you're isolated, alone in the community, and what, you're just, it's the same. It's really humanity we're social creatures. We're people who are not designed to live alone. I
Mhm.
would even argue that the idea of a nuclear family was an invention of politicians, because we were never meant to live outside of a community. And a nuclear
Yeah.
family is actually too small, even. And the initial American dream we're all sold is too small of a dream to contain the possibility, a human community, a community of people. And so, in other words, reach out, build networks. I think
Yeah.
it's resiliency is not simply yourself. Resiliency is, because anybody, you will never have enough arms to protect yourself from a a collapse of civilization, basically. Never.
Right. Yeah.
And frankly, it's I'm not saying we're living in a collapsed civilization, but we should certainly act like it, right?
Yeah.
Because honestly, if we're more concerned, politicians are more concerned these days over what's it called, drag queen parties than they are about people getting fed like on the street.
Yeah.
So like
There's
Lou,
truth to that.
these are the issues.
Yeah.
So I really want people to take, if whoever's listening on this, to take heart. There are other people who are concerned just as much as you are, because if you're listening to this podcast, you are definitely concerned.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? That means learn how to exercise in cryptocurrency, learn how to don't put all your eggs in one basket, diversify, figure out a way to actually buy some chickens, and grow. And yeah, if you can, do it. If you can't figure out vertical gardening, don't, lettuce, a pound, pack of lettuce shot up to that is the big boxes that they use to transfer from the farm, went up over $100 in the last couple of months. People stopped. I mean, if you notice, people they're not serving the same kind of lettuce, or they're not serving lettuce at all in restaurants.
Right.
So
Right.
but those are things that are easily growable anywhere, because it resists the cold, and it grows fine in warm climates as well. So there are opportunities, there are ways to get around this, and of course it'd be easier if you can share in resources with other people, and who have the same concerns. There's a lot of things that we don't have to manage all on us, and mostly I'll tell you what, most of us don't have the skill sets anymore to do it all ourselves anyway, like a pioneering culture. That's long gone, right? So it's helpful, but you still have to learn from someone else. Who's that going to be, right?
Yeah.
The greatest generation is in their 90s, is actually about 100 years old now.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna be relying on you, I think, Hector. If things go down
For some news, sure.
I'm gonna give you a call. So as we wrap things up here, Hector, what are you up to these days? You ran for governor. That was a hard thing to do based on the political climate here in the state of Florida. You held that libertarian banner, you and your running mate Tubb, who went out there and continue to spread the message of peace and prosperity and all the good things that we like about libertarianism. What are you up to these days, or what are you planning on doing anything else? Are you going to run for anything else? What do we need to know about Hector Roos, and where can we find you? Do you write anywhere? Do you blog anywhere? What can we expect from you?
Sure. Well, you can find me on social media at Roos for Florida, ROOS for FOR Florida. I have a website there I have to relaunch. I'm social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram there. And ultimately, I'm still fighting this petition to hold the governor accountable for these immigrant relocation programs. The one that he operated out of Texas, which I think he operated out of Texas illegally. There are ways to do things. I do agree that immigration is an issue, but it's an issue because the federal government has made it so difficult to do so. They usurp the power of Congress. The Congress has had ultimately a lot of authority towards historically, like even in recent history. This is going to be a quick rant about over immigration, right? So you could call your congressperson. You call your congressperson. They could actually help you with immigration issues. And actually, because after 9/11, that ended. So since 9/11. That's 2001, it's become incredibly difficult to actually immigrate into the United States. And even that's the longest war in history of the United States, right? And we still haven't rolled back from the conclusion of Afghanistan and Iraq. We still have these policies in place that make it very difficult. And ultimately, that's what people are frustrated about, because then people have to insert illegally, and it's basically any kind of prohibition creates a black market. And especially when there's so much demand, we're seeing that happen. Now, of course, I have my petition. They just replied to it in court. I have a response to myself in another week or so. And the question simply is, where'd you get this authority?
Yeah,
to
that's
basically
interesting.
say how you can use public dollars in another state to institute a program that's not what's described in this authorization for budget, right? Uh, Ultimately, my goal here politically is I do that because there's not a lot of people who are holding anybody accountable these days. I said, hey, this is not that difficult to do court filings, but similarly to run for I'm still involved in recruiting candidates for running for office, provide them resources. There's a lot of things that go into running for office that people don't know where to even start.
Yeah,
And generally speaking, I do have to share the idea that we have to have a culture of people not only running for office but just showing up to City Hall. So if
hmm,
people, by the way, the best way to introduce yourself in a local community is just show up. Just show up and
yeah,
talk to the people in the room. And the next way and if you are right now, we're practically in a crisis situation. So I tell people just go ahead and run. Even
yeah,
if you're going to lose, it's going to be a great introduction to people. Because generally speaking, local governments have about 80% no contest elections, meaning no
yeah,
one decides to run against them. There are no elections. People are elected by default because they're the only person who even signed up. And even the other 20% that are contested, they're generally not serious campaigns anyway. And those 20% are the bigger cities: Miami, Jacksonville, Tampa, Orlando. Orlando has an election this year, for instance. And Tampa does too. So all of them seem to actually have off-year election, by the way.
yeah,
So if you're up, there's qualifying is just generally now uh, uh, through a middle of January if you're actually interested in these big cities. And if you're interested, there's almost any city in Pinellas County or Hillsborough County have elections. In Duval and Jacksonville or Miami-Dade County, they have there are off-year elections. So and that's true also in Broward, by the way, Broward County. So and I'm sure, and I just said Orange, right? So
yeah,
Orlando being in Orange, there are opportunities to get involved, even if you don't want to run for office, but you want to meet people, learn about these campaigns, and maybe introduce yourself and say, "Hey, I want to learn how this works."
right,
That's
right,
how I got started. I just said, I want to learn. I want to
cool.
get involved in this and figure and see if and be more involved in my community.
Yeah,
So, and these are people who if they're running, they have their own concerns. The people who support them have concerns, and it's not sometimes there's obviously local interests because you know when cities can hold the switch over whether your business can open or close at any given
yeah,
moment, people
yeah,
are concerned. And of course, housing is a big issue, and that's all entirely local government driven. But and hopefully places like Gainesville, for instance, they just created a new law that said that they can add accessory dwellings like tiny homes or add an efficiency to a home. And the state government decided, no, we're going to intervene and say that's illegal and we're going to take you to court. I'm like,
wow,
it's maddening somehow how this mission creep that happens from state government comes in and tries to absorb as much power as possible. But honestly, they can do it as much as they want as long as there's no pushback from locals, as long as
yeah,
they're immune to political consequences. So get involved. It's really it's not only a self defense, but it's also the built in community that exists around you. People who care are already out there. You don't have to rely on people who are simply call themselves libertarians, because people care generally much about their kids,
yeah,
much about what they put in their bellies and the water they drink, right, as anyone else. So just
right.
you don't be scared of reaching out and meeting new people. It is it's part of our experience of being on Earth.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good way to end. So, Hector, thanks so much for your work and your involvement in all this stuff and for explaining it so well. We wish you the best in 2023. And again, anytime you want to come on the show, maybe there's something you want to get off your chest or just, just have a pleasant conversation with somebody who'll definitely listen. Hopefully the audience will too. Like he says here, just be a little open-minded to maybe a different perspective and you might learn something along the way. Thanks again, Hector.
Good to see